You've probably heard of a little game called No Man's Sky, and if you've been paying even just a little bit of attention to the gaming community in the past 5 years or so, you've probably heard of its disastrous launch, its gradual recovery, and its eventual redemption.
The Game Award goes to No Man's Sky.
It's actually a really good story, but I'm not here to tell you about that though.
No.
Today, we're gonna focus on the promises Hello Games made about No Man's Sky before its release, and how they compare to the game we have today. This is No Man's Sky, the promises versus the present. To be honest with you, I initially had no idea how to start this video, but I found instant inspiration when I typed in Sean Murray Liar into YouTube, and found a very good compilation by a YouTuber named SoloJones. Now, let's take a look at the video and compare the things Sean says would be in the game and what the game has right now.
We're orbiting around the sun like a real sun, because the planet is actually rotated on its axis. It's a planet, and it's kind of rotating around the sun and stuff.
Unfortunately though, this never really made it into the game, and it's never been added in the 5 years of updates following the launch. According to Sean, the feature was removed because it confused game testers, when the planets and space stations weren't there when they got back to space, and they kept reporting this as a bug.
We've made it to the center.
Could you potentially manually fly to new solar systems?
Yes, but nobody's actually done it yet.
Go into the darkness for as long as you want to.
Unfortunately, this too never made it into the game. In the present day No Man's Sky, you cannot travel to other star systems without accessing your galactic map and punching in your hyperdrive, which is more or less just a fancy loading screen that makes you think you're actually flying through space in light speed.
You could just play the entire game as a trader if you wanted to,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, just like a lot of space games, I could play the entire game just out in space. Often going to freighters, docking with the freighters, picking up some resources from them, ferrying the goods into the space station.
In the present build of No Man's Sky, yes, this is a very viable thing to do. You can have a massive freighter that you can use to store all the items that you need. You can use different types of spaceships to travel between star systems that have their own wealth and economy class. And yes, you can go full space hobo in this game. Any freighter you get your hands on has a massive customizable interior, and you can shape this to anything you want. From a fully functioning command center that you can use to give orders to your other large vessels, or you can be intergalactic Snoop Dogg with your very own space weed garden. Or you can just make a place where you can hang out with your buddies and show off the things that you've found in your adventures. Oh, and yes, we'll talk about multiplayer in a bit.
I'm going to steal some resources, and if I could survive, then this would probably be a pretty good way to play the game.
Battles like that are taking place across the universe.
But you can also, like a lot of players do, just not gather resources. Perhaps you're the type of person who just never wants to do that because it seems a bit laborious, or you just don't like visiting planets, you want to play a space game.
Yes, you can play as Han Solo in No Man's Sky, and it may or may not be as rewarding depending on what you're going for. You can attack NPC freighters and loot them for cargo. They drop things like common items or ship upgrades. And yes, as Sean says, the space police will be after you depending on how much of a naughty boy you've been. Oh, and also, let me just show you how combat looked before. And how it compares to what we have today.
Different races have different attributes. So some are scientific, some are kind of combative,
right?
And depending on how I'm playing, I might want to kind of make an allegiance with one or other, you know. So for instance, I might be a trader, and so I'll favor a trading race. Get tech from them, that kind of.
Yes, there are factions in No Man's Sky, and each of them have very unique alien designs. The three major factions have their own languages that you can learn to become better at interacting with them. And you can do all sorts of missions for them to get better ranking and more respect. And they can help you out too. They can point you to interesting places, give you better multi-tools, or even help you out when you're being attacked by pirates.
It's full of choices. Like here, we're at the boundary between two warring factions. I could join in, I could take sides.
Unfortunately though, factions don't really go to war with each other yet. But knowing the guys in Hello Games, they might actually add this in a future update.
It's things like ships and stuff as well. This is kind of the ship that we've showed off before. It's just a fighter, but you can view variants of it, and there's an infinite number of variations of that ship, which is a cool thing for players. Each one of them is pilotable, each one of them will handle slightly differently. That could be an aim for me, right? To build up my ship enough.
Like a fast, nimble ship that can just swoop in, take out some pods like that.
And then get away before the police start paying me attention.
Back in release day, you could only own one ship at a time, and even though each ship you could own looked different thanks to the procedural generation tech, they all performed pretty much the same. Fast forward to present day No Man's Sky, you can own up to 6 personal ships that you can store in your freighter, and each one can have its own different class and uses. There's also the rare exotic type ships that you can only find in very wealthy economies. And if you're into super weird stuff, there's also the living ship. It's basically a mass of glowing noodles with its own very unique upgrades. And speaking of which, there are just so many ways that you can upgrade your ship now.
Will you be able to play with your friends?
Yeah. You could encounter other players.
Clearly building your own like massively multiplayer world that's procedurally generated.
Do we ever get to see ourselves?
No, you don't see yourself, so the only way for you to know what you look like is for somebody else to see you.
Of all the promises Sean Murray made in the interviews and articles, this is probably the one that angered the gaming community the most when it wasn't in the game back in release day. But I am very happy to say that No Man's Sky does have multiplayer in 2022. There are also regular events now called expeditions, where players start off on one single planet where they have to explore and do missions together, kind of like Path of Exile. And because of all this, No Man's Sky has a very active player base that has one of the friendliest communities to ever adorn a video game. After 5 years of constant updates to the game, Sean Murray and Hello Games have been able to add in most of the things that they promised in the beginning. They also eagerly listened to their community to add in things that weren't originally planned for the game, like base building, multiple planetary vehicles, a third-person camera and a customizable character, an overhaul in exploration and combat, and best of all, free VR support. And there's like many more.
Someone at Valve, who was a fan of the game, said to me, what you do now is more important than what you say. There's only one thing that's credible, and that's your actions.
In conclusion, the No Man's Sky that we have now is a very different game from the one that was released back in 2016. But the real question is No Man's Sky good now?
Yes.
Well, Steam ratings certainly say so. And the other question is, has Sean Murray fulfilled his promises?
Sort of.
In a recent interview with IGN, Sean said that No Man's Sky isn't finished by a long shot, meaning to say that despite 5 years of constant updates to the game, the man isn't planning on stopping anytime soon. And I'm looking forward to seeing where they take this game in the future.